Welcome back to Celestial Scrolls, where ancient Chinese myths and legends come alive through storytelling. Today, we continue our epic journey with Chapter 39 of Journey to the West, the Realm of Forgotten Dreams. In our previous episode, Tang Sanzang and his disciples reached the crossroads of all paths, where they chose to embrace eternal service as living bridges between realms rather than continue seeking a distant destination. They discovered that their true journey was not toward the Western paradise, but deeper into infinite possibilities of conscious service and compassionate connection. This chapter takes our transformed heroes into their first adventure as eternal servants of wisdom, as they're drawn to a realm where dreams themselves have been abandoned and forgotten. Here they'll discover that some of the most profound service involves helping beings remember not just what they've lost, but what they never dared to imagine was possible. If you've been following our heroes through their ultimate transformation into living scriptures, you won't want to miss this exploration of how hope itself can be rekindled in the most unlikely places. Hit subscribe and the notification bell to continue this legendary quest. Now, let's enter the realm of forgotten dreams. The path from the crossroads of all paths felt different beneath their feet, not because it had changed, but because they had. Tang Sanzang and his disciples moved with the fluid grace of beings who no longer struggled against their purpose, but flowed in harmony with it. The network of connection they had become part of guided them not through conscious decision, but through intuitive response to where they were most needed. "Master," Wukong observed as they walked through landscape that seemed to shift between the substantial and the ephemeral, "I can sense our destination calling, but it feels muffled, as if something is dampening the signal." Indeed, the further they traveled, the more the world around them seemed to lose definition. Colors faded to sepia tones, sounds became muted and distant, and even the air itself felt thinner, less substantial. Most disturbing of all, the very light seemed to be draining away, not into darkness, but into a gray nothingness that was somehow more oppressive than the deepest night. Tang Sanzang felt his staff responding to this strange environment, its 108 characters pulsing with increased intensity as if working harder to maintain their illumination. "We're entering a realm where something fundamental has been lost," he realized. "Not destroyed, but abandoned." Bajie, his transformed sensitivity making him acutely aware of emotional atmospheres, shivered despite the moderate temperature. "It feels like sadness," he said quietly, "but not the sharp sadness of loss. More like the dull sadness of never having tried." As they continued deeper into this strange realm, they began to encounter its inhabitants, beings who moved through their environment with mechanical efficiency, but no apparent joy or purpose beyond mere survival. These creatures looked human, but seemed somehow diminished, as if they were living as partial versions of themselves. The first group they met was working in what appeared to be a factory, though what they were producing was unclear. The workers performed their tasks with precise competence, but no engagement, their faces blank and their movements purely functional. "Excuse me," Tang Sanzang approached one of the workers politely. "Could you tell us about this place? We are travelers seeking to understand your realm." The worker paused in his task and looked at Tang Sanzang with eyes that seemed to focus with effort, as if remembering how to see. "This is the production facility," he replied in a voice devoid of inflection. "We produce necessary items for daily survival. It is adequate work for adequate beings." "But what do you dream of creating?" Wukong asked with genuine curiosity. "What would you make if you could make anything?" The worker's expression flickered with momentary confusion, then settled back into blankness. "Dream? I don't understand the question. We make what is needed. Nothing more is required." Sha Wujing tried a different approach. "Before you worked here, what did you hope to become? What called to your heart as a young person?" This question seemed to cause the worker actual discomfort. He clutched his head as if in pain and stepped backward. "Hope? Called to my heart?" These words, they hurt to hear. "Please don't use such language. It makes everything feel insufficient." The worker hurried away, and other workers who had overheard the conversation also moved away from the travelers, their faces showing the first real emotion they had displayed. Fear, mixed with something that might have been longing. "We're in a realm where dreams have been systematically abandoned," Tang Sanzang understood with growing clarity. "Not taken away, but voluntarily surrendered because they created too much pain." As they explored further, they found a settlement that embodied this principle completely. The architecture was purely functional. Buildings that provided adequate shelter but no beauty, streets that facilitated movement but offered no pleasure in walking them, public spaces that served necessary functions but inspired no gathering or celebration. A sign at the settlement center read, "Welcome to Sufficient Town. Population 1,847. All needs met adequately." The residents they encountered moved through their daily routines with the same mechanical efficiency they had observed at the factory. They ate food that provided nutrition but no enjoyment, wore clothes that protected but offered no expression of personality, and spoke only when communication was necessary for practical purposes. This is what happens when people give up on anything beyond mere survival. Baji observed with profound sadness. They've created a life without disappointment by creating a life without aspiration. They were approached by what appeared to be the settlement's administrator, a woman whose gray uniform and gray expression perfectly matched the gray atmosphere around them. "I am Administrator Function," she announced. "You are visitors. State your business." "We are travelers," Tang Sanzang replied gently. "We're here to learn from your community and perhaps offer whatever service might be helpful." Administrator Function's face showed the same flicker of confusion they had seen in the factory worker. "Service? Learn? I don't understand these concepts in their current context. We have achieved perfect adequacy here. No improvements are needed or desired." "But what about beauty?" Wukong asked. "Joy? Wonder? The pleasure of creating something that serves no purpose but bringing happiness?" Administrator Function actually flinched as if the words had physical impact. "Stop," she said, her voice showing the first variation in tone they had heard. "Those concepts are painful. They lead to wanting more than is sufficient. They create dissatisfaction with adequacy. They are forbidden here." "Forbidden by whom?" Sha Wujing asked gently. "By choice," Administrative Function replied, her voice growing quieter. Long ago, we chose to abandon all desires beyond basic need. It was, it was the only way to stop the hurt. As she spoke these words, tears began to form in her eyes, the first genuine emotion they had witnessed in this gray realm. But she quickly wiped them away and straightened her shoulders. You must not speak of such things. It disturbs the peace we have worked so hard to achieve. That evening, they were assigned accommodation in the settlement's visitor facility, a building that provided exactly what was needed for sleep and nothing more. As they settled in for the night, they could hear through the thin walls the sounds of a community going to sleep. But there were no lullabies, no evening conversations, no sounds of contentment or peace. Just the mechanical settling of people preparing for another day of adequate existence. How do we serve people who have chosen protection from hope itself? Tang Sanzang asked his disciples as they gathered quietly to discuss their observations. We can't force them to dream again, Wukong reflected. That would be just another form of violence. But perhaps we can demonstrate what dreaming looks like. Let them observe it safely from a distance. And we must be very gentle, Baji added thoughtfully. Their abandonment of dreams wasn't casual. It was a response to deep pain. They need to feel safe before they can risk hoping again. Xiaowujing nodded slowly. Perhaps we start not with encouraging them to dream, but with helping them remember that adequacy itself could be a foundation for something more rather than a ceiling that limits growth. The next morning, the travelers began their service in the most subtle way possible. Instead of trying to change the settlement systems or convince anyone to abandon their chosen lifestyle, they simply began to infuse their own activities with the joy and purpose that came naturally to their transformed state. Tang Sanzang conducted his morning meditation in the settlement's central square, not as a public display but as his authentic practice. The gentle light from his staff and the peaceful energy of his presence created a small island of tranquility that residents began to notice, though they maintained their distance. Wukong offered to help with various practical tasks around the settlement, but he performed each job with a level of engagement and craftsmanship that went slightly beyond mere adequacy. When he repaired a broken door, he made sure it not only functioned, but operated smoothly and quietly. When he helped move supplies, he found efficient methods that reduced effort while increasing effectiveness. Bajie took over food preparation at the visitor facility, and though he was careful not to create anything too elaborate that might be seen as excessive, he brought care and attention to the cooking that resulted in meals that were not just nutritionally adequate, but genuinely nourishing and satisfying. Xiaowujing simply made himself available to help with whatever needed doing, but he brought to each task a quality of presence and attention that transformed even mundane work into something that felt meaningful. At first, residents observed these activities with suspicion and concern, but gradually, some began to show curiosity. A few started lingering near Tang Sanzang's meditation sessions, not participating, but absorbing the atmosphere of peace. Others found excuses to be present when Wukong was working, subtly studying his methods. Meals prepared by Bajie began to draw more residents than strictly necessary, and people started arriving early just to watch the preparation process. The breakthrough came when a young resident, one of the few whose gray uniform couldn't quite hide an underlying vibrancy, approached Xiaowujing while he was tending a small garden behind the visitor facility. "Why do you work so carefully with those plants?" she asked quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was observing their conversation. "They're just vegetables. Adequate nutrition can be obtained with minimal effort." Sha Wujing continued his gentle work as he replied, "You're right that they provide nutrition. But I've found that when I give attention to the growing process, really notice the soil, the light, the way each plant develops, the work becomes pleasant. The vegetables taste better, but more than that, the time spent tending them feels meaningful rather than merely necessary." The young woman was quiet for a long moment. "Pleasant," she repeated the word as if testing its weight. "I think I remember that feeling from before." "Before what?" Sha Wujing asked gently. "Before we learned that wanting more than adequacy only leads to pain." Her voice grew wistful. I used to paint pictures just for the joy of seeing colors come together, but it made me want to paint even more beautiful pictures, and when I couldn't achieve what I imagined, it hurt so much. So I stopped." Sha Wujing nodded with understanding. The pain of unfulfilled dreams can indeed be intense, but what if the painting itself brought joy, regardless of whether it matched your imagination? What if the pleasure was in the process of creation rather than in achieving a perfect result? The young woman, who quietly told him her name was Lily, though she was officially designated as Resident 847, began visiting the garden regularly. At first, she just watched Sha Wujing work, but gradually she began to help with small tasks. And slowly, very slowly, she began to rediscover the pleasure of nurturing growth for its own sake. Word of these subtle changes began to spread through the settlement. Administrator Function called a meeting to address what she termed concerning deviations from established adequacy protocols. Some residents have been observed engaging in activities beyond minimum necessity, she announced to the gathered population. This threatens the peace we have worked to achieve. It risks reintroducing the painful desires that we have successfully eliminated. But as she spoke, Tang Sanzang noticed that many residents were not looking at her with the blank agreement he had initially observed. Some faces showed conflict, others curiosity, and a few displayed something that might have been the early stirrings of hope. "Administrator Function," Tang Sanzang said respectfully. "May I ask a question?" She nodded curtly. "When your community chose adequacy over aspiration, was the goal to eliminate pain or to eliminate the possibility of growth that might involve temporary pain?" The question hung in the air like a seed waiting to sprout. Administrator Function opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, her gray composure beginning to show cracks. "Because," Tang Sanzang continued gently, "I've observed that some forms of pain, like the discomfort a plant experiences when reaching toward light, are actually part of the process of becoming more than we currently are." Lily stepped forward from the crowd, her voice small but clear. "I've been helping in the garden," she announced, and I've been remembering what it felt like to want to create something beautiful. It does hurt sometimes, when I remember how much joy I used to find in painting, but the hurt isn't the end of the story anymore." Other residents began to murmur among themselves. Someone mentioned noticing how much more satisfying meals had become. Another admitted to enjoying the sound of tools working properly after Wukong's careful repairs. A third confessed to finding unexpected peace during the morning meditations. Administrator Function looked around at her people with growing alarm. "This is exactly what we sought to prevent," she said, her voice rising. "These feelings lead to wanting more, and wanting more leads to disappointment, and disappointment leads to learning," Wukong interjected quietly, "to growth, to the discovery that we're more resilient than we thought, and that joy can exist alongside uncertainty." "What if," Baji added thoughtfully, "adequacy became not a limitation, but a foundation, a stable base from which we could safely explore what might be possible?" The debate that followed continued for hours, with residents sharing long-suppressed memories of dreams abandoned and aspirations set aside. Some remained committed to their chosen adequacy, and the travelers respected that choice. But others began to express tentative interest in rediscovering what they had given up. Over the following weeks, the settlement began to experience what could only be called a gentle renaissance. Lily began painting again, creating simple works that brought color and beauty to the gray environment. Others rediscovered music, craftsmanship, storytelling, and gardening. Most importantly, they learned to hold both adequacy and aspiration simultaneously, maintaining their security while allowing room for growth. The transformation wasn't universal or complete. Many residents remained committed to their original choice, and even those who began to dream again did so cautiously, with full awareness that disappointment remained possible. But something fundamental had shifted in the settlement's atmosphere. Administrator Function eventually approached Tang Sanzang with a request that surprised him. "I want to understand," she said, her gray uniform now accessorized with a small flower that Lily had painted and offered as a gift. "I want to know how you balance hope with safety, dreams with adequacy. But I'm scared." "Fear is natural when we're considering growth," Tang Sanzang replied with infinite gentleness. "But notice that you've already taken the first step. You've allowed curiosity to exist alongside fear. That itself is a form of courage." When the time came for the travelers to continue their eternal journey, the settlement had renamed itself Foundation Town, acknowledging that adequacy could serve as a base for further growth rather than a barrier against it. Not all residents chose to explore beyond their established adequacy, but those who did so had the support and understanding of their community. "You've helped us remember," Lily said as they prepared to depart, "that dreams don't have to be all-or-nothing propositions. They can be gentle additions to adequate lives rather than desperate escapes from them." Administrator Function, who had quietly begun calling herself Administrator Foundation, offered a final insight. "We thought we had to choose between safety and growth. You've shown us that the strongest growth often happens when we feel safest." As they walked away from Foundation Town, where the first sounds of music in decades could be heard drifting from workshops where residents were cautiously rediscovering abandoned crafts, the travelers reflected on the profound lessons their first mission as eternal servants had taught them. "We learned that some communities need permission to hope again," Tang Sanzang observed, "and that such permission must be offered gently, with full respect for the pain that caused them to abandon hope in the first place." "We discovered that adequate can be a foundation rather than a ceiling. Wukong added thoughtfully that security and growth aren't opposites, but can support each other. And we found that sometimes the greatest service is simply demonstrating what joy looks like, Baji concluded, so that others can remember it exists. Xiao Wujing nodded, looking back at the town where small gardens were beginning to bloom around functional buildings. Perhaps most importantly, we learned that transformation doesn't require abandoning what has served us, but can involve expanding from what we've already achieved. The path ahead led toward new challenges and new opportunities for service, but they walked it with the deep satisfaction of beings who had found their authentic purpose. They were no longer seeking the Western paradise. They were creating it one community at a time through the patient, gentle work of helping others remember what was possible. And that concludes Chapter 39. Tang Sanzang and his disciples have completed their first mission as eternal servants of wisdom, helping the realm of forgotten dreams transform into Foundation Town by gently demonstrating that adequacy can be a base for growth rather than a barrier against it. They learned that some communities need permission to hope again, and that such permission must be offered with infinite gentleness and respect. If you enjoyed watching our heroes help a community rediscover the possibility of dreaming while maintaining their sense of security, please hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. How do you balance hope with safety in your own life? What did you think of their approach of demonstrating joy rather than arguing for it? Subscribe and turn on notifications to continue following our transformed heroes in their eternal journey of service and discovery. Here at Celestial Scrolls, we're committed to bringing these profound tales of gentle transformation and the careful cultivation of hope to life, one chapter at a time. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of how dreams can be rekindled through patient presence and authentic example. I'll see you next time as we continue with our heroes in their infinite spiral of learning through service.